Sorry, Chairman, do we have any sound on this? But I have no sound. Does Steve have sound? No, there's no sound on Zoom.
Is that better?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, wonderful.
Thank you. I don't know why the microphone wasn't showing. I've switched it off and on again and it's working now.
Thanks.
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Dave Busby and Councillor Ruth Reid is attending as a substitute. Councillor Graham White is in attendance, but he's virtual, so obviously won't be able to vote if we have to vote on anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much and welcome, Councillor Reid. The minutes of the last meeting, which nobody apart from the people on the committee will have remembered anything about. Can I take them as read? Agreed. That agreed? Any declaration of interest before the meeting, Kim?
None received, Chair.
Any questions from members?
None received and none received from members either, Chair.
Right, so we can start off with the agenda item 6. This is our forward work programme, and you'll find this just at the end really of the front sheet. There's not a lot to say on it tonight, in as much as the forward programme will develop as obviously we find our feet. The first part just is the recommendations have already been accepted. Part 2 is obviously nothing there. Part 3 is the upcoming items, and these are what are already in the schedule. There is an extra one to put in. Claire Upton Brown can't attend this evening, so she will be attending on the 26th of September with an update on development management. I don't know whether anyone is coming along. I've not been told that anyone's going to say anything on it before September, which is a long time actually to get an update on development management, but she's got a clash with the meeting in Guildford, so she sends her apologies. And part 4 is task and finish groups, and I think we learnt from the training just how important those are and how enjoyable a task and finish group is, but that again is for you to decide as we go through, you know, the sort of topic that would be useful to do that. We do also have the sorry, if anybody want to comment on that, let me rush you through. We also always get the forward programme of the executive to give us an idea of something we might want to scrutinise in the future. Very parochial, I know, but I noticed the Farnham Park SANG, which is crucial to Farnham. Sorry to be parochial, but the Farnham has not got enough SANG to deliver its quantity of housing at the moment. And in the neighbourhood plan, working with Waverley, we had this site. And the idea was that Waverley would buy it and it would be an extension to Farnham Park, which is currently the most important. You all up to date with SANG, suitable alternative natural green space, that you have to provide if you build a house, a residence in Farnham and elsewhere now, because the Wealdon Heaths have also got strength. So it's all to do with providing alternative green space. And I would like certainly to keep an eye on this one, although it's in the executive and very much as a resources thing from a services point of view, we cannot deliver houses in Farnham if we don't have SANG. So I just really wanted to make that point. Anybody else, anything they wish to say or ask about the forward programmes? I've got you down if there's anything extra, is that right, Kimberly? There's nothing I've missed?
No, nothing missed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Which moves us on to the interesting part of the evening, really, the presentation from all the service heads. I think I've more or less said why they're here, and I think you all know them anyway, well, know of them. So let's kick off straight away. I have Richard Homewood down from the Regulatory Services as the first one. Evening, Richard. If you could just say a bit about yourself, I mean, other than the fact you're Richard Homewood, which I'd rather spoil that, but just, you know, basically what's within your remit, which I'm sure you're going to do anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Richard Homewood, as you said. I'm the Executive Head of Regulatory Services. I was formerly the Head of Environmental Services in Waverley before the restructure. And I've been working at Waverley for for 8 years now. Seems to have flown by. Certainly, I've got a background in environmental and regulatory services going back for 49 years now. So reasonably well experienced.
Sorry, Richard. Sorry. Right, sorry about that, Richard. If you'd like to carry on.
That's okay.
Thank you.
That's okay. No
We
problem.
don't all pass out.
Can everybody hear me better now? Okay, good. So I'll run through very quickly the services covered by regulatory services in Waverley for you. And the first area is food and safety team. There's an environmental protection team, private sector housing team, environmental enforcement team, licensing team, emergency planning and corporate health and safety. So quite a variety of work covered by the teams within regulatory services. There is a structure chart there. I apologise if you can't see it too well, which sets out the 6 direct reports to me delivering those services. I'm having trouble reading it as well up there. I do apologise. I believe we will circulate these to members in due course, so you'll have it there. So you have Suzanne Robinson, who's the Environmental Health Manager for Food and Safety. Jeanette Guy is the Environmental Health Manager for Environmental Protection. Simon Brisk is currently the Private Sector Housing Manager, but he will be replaced shortly by Sean Grady. Simon's retiring after 35 years at Waverley. So I think he's earned his retirement now. Sam Tyler is the Environmental Enforcement Manager, although she's currently on maternity leave, and that post is currently filled by Daniel Pamphlet, who's been seconded into that role until she returns. Paul Hughes is the Licensing Manager, and Anthony James is the Emergency Planning and Resilience Officer, who also covers corporate health and safety and business continuity as well. So they're the key people below me in those teams. Very quickly, food safety team covers food business inspections, food hygiene inspections, the sampling of high-risk foods, food poisoning investigations. Fortunately, we don't get many of those. And they deal with health and safety enforcement in private businesses and accident investigation. And they've had 1 or 2 very sort of interesting accidents to investigate recently as well. They also deal with infection control and investigation and played a key part in the response to COVID in supporting businesses and ensuring businesses supplied with the COVID regulations. And they deal with registration of special treatments. Now that's anything that involves piercing the skin, which again presents a risk of infection. So it's all about infection control and preventing people picking up some nasty infections. So the next team is Environmental Protection Team. They deal with air quality monitoring under the local air quality management regime set by the government. We have 2 air quality management areas in the borough, which we work on quite closely. We've just been to executive with a clean air strategy for the borough, and there's a number of air quality projects underway at the moment as well. They also deal with environmental permitting and prescribed processes. That's polluting processes in the area like timber treatments, fuel depots, that sort of thing, where the potential to harm the environment is quite significant. And they deal with private water supply sampling as well. We have about 40 plus private water supplies operating within the borough. That's wells and pipes and boreholes, that sort of thing. And then they move on to deal with pollution complaints around noise, smoke and odour, and deal with those as well. The team also goes on to deal with animal welfare licensing, street trading licensing, scrap metal dealers licensing, planning and licensing consultation, where they can respond to planning applications and deal with environmental impact issues around planning applications. And they deal with licensing applications, stray dogs and pest control services. The private sector, I think you've gone too far. And again. So the private sector housing team, they enforce the Housing Health and Safety Rating Scheme, which is an environmental standard for housing accommodation in the private rented sector. And they deal with social landlords except Waverley Borough Council's own properties. So we can't enforce against ourselves, and there is a housing regulator that monitors the performance of our own housing stock. They deal with houses in multi-occupation. This is buildings let into flats and bedsits, and they license those to ensure fire precautions are adequate and facilities are adequate for the people that are working in them. They deal with caravan site licensing, disabled facilities grants and adaptations for independent living, empty homes by trying to get as many empty homes back into use as possible. They deal with Public Health Act funerals, where there are no relatives to deal with a funeral. And they deal with filthy and verminous premises. So quite a range of activity for the private sector housing team as well. The environmental enforcement team deal with fly tipping, abandoned vehicles and waste duty of care enforcement. They also deal with the public space protection orders for dog fouling and dog controls. And those were brought back to the executive recently and are going on to full council on the 18th of July. And there's an all-member briefing on that being scheduled for the 11th of July, which all councillors have been invited to tell you more about that. They work with the community safety team and the joint action group with the police to tackle antisocial behaviour and low-level criminal activity. And they assist my colleague in terms of monitoring the waste and street cleaning contracts. We then have the licensing team. These are the people that license premises in the borough and deal with alcohol sales and regulated entertainment. They are there to ensure that licensed premises pursue the licensing objectives around preventing crime and disorder, ensuring public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm in their premises. They also deal with the Gambling Act, which is betting shops, lotteries and gaming machines, and charity collections, which is street collections and house collections. An important part of their work is also taxi and private hire vehicles and drivers, which they license and work with the police and other agencies to ensure they're fit and proper persons to carry people around and that the vehicles are safe to travel in. They then deal with pavement licensing, which is a regime transferred from the county council during COVID to license tables and chairs outside of premises. And Paul also deals with the CCTV management for the council. And lastly, they deal with sex establishments, which fortunately we don't have any in the borough at the moment. So, and then we move on to the emergency planning team. And the council is a category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. And we have to assess the risk of emergencies occurring, and we have a register of risks around emergencies. We have to have emergency plans in place to reduce, control or mitigate the effects of any emergency. We have to warn and inform the public. We work closely with town and parish councils to help them prepare their emergency plans as well. And then we share information with other responders to enhance coordination. So we work closely with emergency services in our planning around emergency responses to ensure that the responses are effective and support the community. We, as a category 1 responder, our role is to support the emergency services and the community in the event of an incident. We are not the blue light service that responds immediately. We are there to support the blue light services and deal with the aftermath, as well as supporting people during the incident. We're responsible for setting up rest centres, providing transport support, environmental health and dangerous structures. We deal with the homelessness aspects of incidents and provide welfare support for people. And we carry lists of vulnerable people in the community with contact details so that we can contact them in the event of things like a water outage or flooding to make sure they're safe and that they've got everything they need. And finally, corporate health and safety. This is an internal issue for us to ensure that we're complying with the Health and Safety at Work Act, that our employees are protected. We are a large employer. We have a duty to ensure that the workplace is under control, that the employees are safe and visitors are safe, and that our contractors and service users are safe, and our contractors actually work safely and don't put anybody at risk. And the management and all employees have a duty to ensure their own safety and the safety of others at work. So it's not just the responsibility of management, the responsibility of every member of staff to ensure adequate health and safety. That's a very quick ramble through, Chair. There's an awful lot there.
There is an awful lot there, and normally I would not curtail discussion at all. And normally we're around a table in committee room 1 and we could carry on. But I honestly don't really want a huge amount of questions on each of the service areas tonight. If you look at the list, it's now 7:20. And, you know, we do have another 5 to go through. So what I would suggest is we're all going to get the slides, digest the slides again, and then put into an email your questions. By all means, copy in the whole committee if you think it's a topic that really perhaps needs further investigation. But I really, unless you have a really mind-blowing question that can't wait, I would suggest we don't go into in-depth questions. I think that all the heads of service were asked to put in everything that would avoid people having to ask a question. You know, if it were all in the report, you wouldn't have to ask. But please, if somebody really has something to say, don't let me stop them. That's very kind. So thank you very much, Richard. I thought it was excellent, and certainly with the slide, but it is vast, isn't it? I mean, your remit is absolutely vast. So it's going to take some coming to terms with for us, and also to find out which bit that we are most worried about, if we're worried about anything at all. So thank you for that. And we'll move on to environmental services. Chris Wheeler. Again, if you'd like to say a little bit about yourself, because you're relatively new to the area for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Chris Wheeler. I'm the Executive Head of Environmental Services and was appointed to the role last October in the reorganisation. Formerly, I was the Head of Operational Services at Guildford, and I've been at Guildford since 2004. The common theme throughout that has been looking after waste and street cleaning services, but in Guildford I also looked after a range of other services, including parks, parking, housing and other services as well. So quite a wide range of things throughout my time at Guildford. In terms of my areas, it's a simpler structure, but a lot of work goes on beneath that simpler structure on this compared to Richard's areas. The service areas are well known to you, no doubt. Recycling, waste and garden waste collections are the biggest task. A lot of activity goes there. Obviously, the recycling and waste services are universal, and the garden waste service is subscription. We have about 18,000 or so customers on that out of the properties in Waverley. The street cleaning service is exactly what it says on the tin. It is there to clean and keep tidy the public highway and other areas of relevant land. So that's its role. Both of those services, all of those services are delivered under contract via BIFA. The Parks and Countryside service is another big area. It has lots of parts, but again, the biggest part of that is undertaken by a contractor who does the parks, open spaces for us, and lots of grass cutting. If we move on. So in terms of the structure, I'd say it's a little bit simpler. Matt Lang will probably be well known to most councillors. He's been with us for quite a number of years, and he's the Green Spaces Manager, so looking after the Parks and Countryside work. In terms of the waste contract and street cleaning contract, the main task is contract management and monitoring. At the moment, that post is vacant. We're in the process of recruiting to that, and we've had an interim working with us to support that contract management for a period of time. As my colleague Richard mentioned earlier, I've got a dotted line there to Sam, who is currently on maternity leave and covered by Dan Pamphlet, and her role is to support as part of that wider environmental enforcement piece to monitor contracts, because mostly they'll be out and about in areas where the contracts have been delivered. So if we go to the next slide, please. In terms of the waste service work, in a bit more detail, so the recycling and refuse, garden waste, food waste and street cleaning services, so they're all, as you're probably well aware the recycling and refuse services are fortnightly, as is garden waste. The food waste is every week, and that's delivered on a separate fleet. And the street cleaning service runs across the whole borough out of the Farnham depot as well. So it's all delivered via the contracts, with the Waverley officer side focused pretty much on contract management and service development. In terms of the green spaces work area, this is a bit broader. So we have the countryside rangers who look after quite a bit of land for us across the borough. Lots of sites of specific scientific interest, including Frensham Ponds and surrounds. And they also do a lot of work with volunteers. In terms of the general contract, we have contract management in place, and we look after parks, open spaces, recreation grounds, football pitches, play areas, all under that contract. We also manage quite a number of events through the parks and in countryside spaces. So some filming and some events, activities, and other activities that need managing and licensing. Then we have tree works. So there's two parts to that. The tree planning and protection is all around tree protection orders and making sure that the trees that we have in the borough are appropriately protected as far as is possible within the law. So there's a team there who just work pretty much on TPOs, managing and maintaining that stock. The tree management and assessment is actually about our trees on our land and making sure our trees are safe, and we have a lot of trees. So it's a really important task. The last area is cemetery management. We have one. It is not a particularly busy cemetery and is quite a low profile service, but it is there and it's managed by this team. And that's it as a quick summary. So thank you, Chair.
That was quick, and I'm sure there's hundreds of questions on the issues there. But again, if I could ask you to come back later, unless you've got something burning. But you know, I think as a councillor, we do get a lot of queries about the areas covered by your presentation. So, has anyone got a question or a statement? That's brilliant. So again, you know, anything when you get the slides that you want to ask, put it down in writing, and we'll get get it answered for you. Which moves us on then to, I have next, regeneration and planning policy. Abby Lewis is going to present this one for us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Evening, councillors. So I'm Abby Lewis. I'm the Executive Head of Regeneration and Planning Policy. Like Chris, I joined the joint management team back in October. Prior to that, I've been at Guildford for a year, or just over a year, as Head of Corporate Projects, so delivery of kind of main capital projects that sit currently within the programme. And prior to that, working up in London on Waterloo and South Bank area in terms of delivery of key projects there. So my area covers 4 key
Excuse me, Councillor Reid again.
I shall shimmy. Thank you. Yeah, so my key service area covers 4 key teams. So regeneration, capital projects, housing delivery, economic development, and planning policy. So under that structure, I've got 4 excellent managers. So I've got Andrew, who's on the call today. So he's the interim planning policy manager. Louisa Blundell, who some of you all know, who is a housing development manager. Debbie Smith, development program manager, and Catherine Knight, who's economic development manager. And beneath that, I've got a team. I've got a number of vacancies at the moment, but we're otherwise quite a well-resourced team with good skills and experience to deliver the task at hand. So in terms of planning policy, we've got a key item on the agenda tonight to talk about the local plan update. So won't dwell too much on this, but just in terms of the remit, cover local plan, neighbourhood plans, and supporting parishes in terms of moving those forwards through to being made documents, supplementary planning documents, which are critical and kind of accompany the main local plan. We, within the service, provide technical advice on heritage, conservation and design. So that's very much more interface with development management fronts. So dealing with a number of planning applications that come in and responding to them, but also it includes things like developing conservation area appraisals. We are also tasked with collecting and distributing developer contributions. Predominantly nowadays that's around SIL, which is no mean feat. It's a heavily involved process and incredibly intensive. And we also monitor that and report on that annually. We also are very heavily involved at the moment in responding to a number of consultations which have come either out from a national level, so think about the levelling up agenda, or responses to the area of outstanding natural beauty consultation, which is very, very current matter. So moving on to the next area, capital projects. So this is really, as it says on the screen, progression of key corporate projects from inception through feasibility to delivery. They are typically complex schemes that predominantly involve our own assets and looking at how we can better utilise those. But they are about delivering true regeneration, think about delivering community facilities, but also having at the back of our mind commercial return. On the screen there's a number of key projects that form within that overall programme. Some of them may be familiar to you, others not. Fairground Car Park, Brightwell, 69 High Street, Waden Lane Car Park, Ware Hill Youth Campus, Bulmer Hill 3G, Waycourt East, the Berries, Wagon Yard, Broadwater Park. You get the idea. There's quite a few projects that sit within that overall programme, and there are many more. So certainly there's work that we're doing with members around prioritising those to make sure that we actually get those delivered. And as it says on there, we don't operate in isolation. We are critically have a key interface with assets, housing development colleagues who also sit within my team, and finance fundamentally. Next area, housing development. So this is very much around the delivery of affordable and sustainable housing for the housing revenue account. Again, from inception through to delivery and completion on Waverley owned land. We have a pipeline of schemes. Some of those came through full council earlier this year. And there's a kind of continuation of reports that follow as we kind of complete the feasibility work and want to move into development. There is also a retrofit of existing stock as part of the regeneration scheme of Oxford Bridge. We're involved in marketing and conveyancing of shared ownership units. We are also involved in negotiation and acquisition of affordable homes via Section 106 to increase the stock within the overall housing revenue account. And critically, as I touched on before, there's also an interface with the corporate project. So for example, Fairground site or the Berries or other schemes where there may be an opportunity to incorporate affordable housing into that. And the final area is economic development. So some members may be aware that we're currently in the process of producing a new economic development strategy and a company action plan. So that's currently in draft. But essentially economic development encompasses all those things that are on your screen really and more. I think typically it's thought of as kind of business support, but it goes a lot further than that. It's around skills, infrastructure, and making sure that there's the right infrastructure in place to support business and economic growth. It's about inward investment, how we attract new business to the area and support them in doing so. And critically thinking about what our key sectors are across the borough and how we can best support those to drive jobs, drive investment for the benefit of residents. Partnership working, as you might expect, forms a kind of critical part of this. We've got 3 prospective business improvement districts at the moment. So those are Godalming, Cranley and Farnham. And we are working with them to take them through that process. We also work critically with chambers of commerce and town councils to understand the movers and shakers in both all of our settlement areas. And we are also involved in the delivery of projects that link to government grants. So the latest one would be the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, where we've been allocated £1 million for use to boost prosperity across the borough. And finally, you'll be glad to hear, final sentence and slide, we critically are a kind of key enabler in terms of communicating what's going on across the borough, either led by us or in collaboration with other agencies who support business. And I would really recommend that you subscribe to the newsletter that's issued on a regular basis, so that captures a lot of the work that the team are doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And again, you mentioned local plan part 1. You will actually get a chance to speak on that. You'll be glad to know when we do that item. It's not a presentation. Well, it is, but we will be discussing that and coming up with recommendations. Again, there's a mass of questions there, Abby, but over the months, we'll get round to asking them. Councillor Rubini?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick statement one here. When you do your projects, I noticed there are several in Hazlemere, for example, we're not always kept up with speed in what is going on. Is it possible that you work through the project? I'm not saying every month, but as you take on a new bit of it, can you let the local councillors know, please?
You raised an interesting point, Councillor Rubini, because our biggest beef on this committee, but just as backbenchers, is that we're not kept up to speed with information. So, you know, basically we're asking all heads of service, you know, keep us informed on anything within your remit that, you know, that we can be useful as ward councillors or Farnham or wherever we represent councillors, because it is important. Communications is key to any organisation, isn't it? So thank you very much, Abby, for that. And thank you for rushing through. It was absolutely extraordinary. Thank goodness we got the slides, but, you know, most helpful. So on to community services. Oh, right. I was just going to say who's doing that. So you can introduce yourself and explain why.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that I think Sam's been held up. So if you wouldn't mind, we will circulate some information subsequently, unless she suddenly appears on the screen. We're happy to circulate information subsequently, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, if we go down, if Sam does suddenly appear on the screen or in the room, we can add it on at the end. But
thank you, Chair.
That would be, yes, perfect. And who's going to be doing commercial services? I'm glad you came. Right, again, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name's Ian Doyle. I'm the Joint Strategic Director for Transformation and Governance, which covers a variety of areas, mostly ones that fall into the remit of the Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but one that doesn't is commercial services. Kelvin, the head of commercial services, is away this week, so he's asked me to step in between other things I'm doing this evening to give you, be pleased to hear, a fairly brief update, picking up on the key points, which I will do now. Firstly, commercial services covers building control, parking, Waverley training services, leisure and events, and heritage. I spoke to Kelvin about this a couple of days ago, and we wanted to pick up on two key areas, and I've got two colleagues with me here that will give you a few bullet points on some important information I think you'll want to hear about. But within the service plan for commercial services, building control and Waverley training services are focused pretty much on expanding and growing their services, which is very much a business as usual service aspiration from year to year. Parking is obviously a large service for the council, but the key focus for this year will be on improving the customer interface. We're looking to upgrade all the parking machines to increase payment options and increase dwell time. This will be a large procurement exercise with the implementation of the new machines taking place early in 2024. But the two key areas of commercial services that have significant additional elements of work are leisure, with the introduction of a new leisure operator next month, proposed refurbishment of Godalming and Farnham leisure centres, and a new leisure centre for Cranley. I'm pleased to say Tamsin McLeod is with us, the leisure services manager, and she'll give you a few brief bullets in a minute to update you on that, particularly on service plan outcomes CS8 to CS9. Heritage is also delivering a major project this year with the long-awaited refurbishment of the Museum of Farnham. And Charlotte Hall is here with me as well, the Arts and Culture Manager, and we'll talk you through some of the key areas on that project, if that's okay, Chair, and I will be briefly finished.
Thank you very much. No, that's fine. You're going to give us all that in writing as well, I take it.
Absolutely, Chair. We will circulate after the meeting.
Right. Oops. Who are we moving on to first? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tamsin McLeod, Leisure Services Manager, and I'm very pleased to report that the detailed leisure management contract tender has now concluded, and we've awarded our contract to Everyone Active, otherwise known as SLM, for a minimum of 10 years. That secured a really positive financial position for the council, which is a fantastic outcome. We're in the process of mobilisation of that contract, which starts next Saturday, the 1st of July. We're ahead of schedule, and Everyone Active are an industry specialist who manage over 200 centres across the UK. So they're fantastic at what they do. They've got a really active, heavy active communities programme, which is a large part of our new contract, and that we'll work really closely with them to make sure that we increase participation across the borough and get out to those rural areas to access everybody. The opportunity of the new contract will provides an open day on Saturday, the 1st of July. So we've got an open day at each of the 4 leisure centres on that Saturday, with celebrities and TikTok footballers and free activities going on. So a really exciting opportunity to celebrate this fantastic occasion. The other major project that we're dealing with in leisure is delivering a new low carbon leisure centre in Cranley. Following council commitment, we've successfully completed and awarded the design team contract. That's gone to GT3 Architects, and they're starting to develop this exciting concept for us. We're in the very, very early stages, but next steps will include early engagement with stakeholders and with residents to refine the facility mix. And then we'll work with them to deliver those key aspects, including cost, climate change, and obviously leisure need within the community. So we plan to come back to ONS later this year with more detail around design and cost elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamsin. Very exciting times we're living in. We set up a small group to work on the Cranley Leisure Centre. It was an example, not quite well, I suppose it was a task and finish, but they worked very hard to, the early stages. And I'm so delighted that it worked out well for both that group and also for the borough. So thank you, Tamsin. Is it Charlotte now who's going to tell us about the new museum? Well, not the new museum. We hope it looks smart.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Charlotte Hall. I'm the Arts and Cultural Services Manager here at Waverley Borough Council. Just come to give an update on the MEND project. So the council has been successful in attracting a capital grant of 734,000 from Arts Council England's Museum Estate and Development Fund. And that's really to carry out essential brickwork repair and conservation works to the front facade of Weelmer House, which is otherwise known to us all as the Museum of Farnham in West Street, Farnham. So following a open tender process, Waverley or the council have now appointed a consultancy team of surveyors and historic building specialists who will ensure that the scope of work will be delivered to the highest sort of heritage standards demanded really of a grade 1 listed building. So over the summer and autumn months, that team will be working intensively to really advance the project forward to RIBA stage 4, which will involve a very detailed resurveying and inspection of the high level brickwork, which was last looked at in 2018. They'll be obtaining all the relevant statutory consents expected for a grade 1 property, and they'll be preparing the tender for the main build contractor. So all being well, we're expecting the construction works to begin early in 2024, and then for the project to be completed the following year by summer of 2025. And in fact, we have, according to the fund criteria, that the project must be delivered by 2026. So it's a short and intense piece of work once it gets going. Our sort of main area of activity really over the coming sort of months is to really look at attracting some further external funding and to reduce the sort of the project funding gap. And we've identified sort of 3 to 4 potential funders who we're looking to go to, and I'm certain that job will be made easier now, having got that substantial funding from the Arts Council sort of under our belt. And then the project itself, there is a project initiation document now for the project, and I'm very happy to share that for anybody that might have an interest. It will be reported to the council's corporate asset and investment advisory board alongside the Arts Council as well. And we're working very closely with our partners, Farnham Maltings and the museum team, to make it a really exciting conservation in action project. The museum will be open throughout the works, and we really want to celebrate the fact that the project is happening, and to involve communities in that process as much as possible. Thank you.
No, thank you, Charlotte. And I think most of us would like that documented. You know, we will learn a lot from it, if nothing else. You know, Farnham is cursed and blessed at the same time with a huge number of listed buildings, more than Chester, as we learnt when we were doing the neighbourhood plan. But of course, it comes at a cost, because you have to do the repairs in a timely way and in a, you know, a set way. Even the gates at West Street Cemetery cost an arm and a leg, because they're listed as well. Even the pillars, everything, you know, is listed, and you can't just stick a bit of concrete in. So thank you very much indeed, and do send us documents and any other notes. I'm sure we'll all enjoy reading them, and as I say, learn for other projects as well. Thank you very much. And that completes, unless Sam has appeared. No, right. Our presentations. Can I thank you all, both for the slides that we're going to get, but also your speed and your clarity and the comprehensive nature of it, because when we get those slides, we really will have a good breakdown of what we're supposed to be looking at and scrutinizing, and it'll give us a good handle on the sort of topics. I mean, already the topics seem to be shooting into my head, so I'm sure they're shooting into heads of people sitting around in this council chamber. So thank you very much. Do we need to keep these people here? Or?
Some of the heads of service will need to stay just before.
Oh, fine, right. So you're all, you can't all rush off. So sorry about that. I did try. So, right, thanks, Ian. So moving on then to item 8, which is the corporate performance report. And this is something that is always on the agenda. And you'll notice that we get the entire document, but our services are covered, or the areas that are covered by ONS services start on page 42 of this particular document. And Jenny, you're going to take us through this, I hope. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and councillors. So for this, you should be looking at the separate document that you were sent or given, not the one in your agenda pack, which has some red writing in it. So the corporate performance report is generated on a quarterly basis. It's generated to provide excuse me, a progress update of the 12 service areas. It's reported to this committee and to the other ONS committee 4 times a year. Quarter 4 and the annual outturn report is now in June. That's the report you'll see tonight. Then in September, you'll see the quarter 1 report. In November, you'll see the quarter 2 report. In January, there's no quarterly performance report, but you will see the service plans. And then in March, you'll see the quarter 3 report. The first few pages of the performance report really explain how we assess the performance that's included within the report. Page 3 shows a summary of the different service areas and which service areas are scrutinized by each committee. And then from there until page 15 is a corporate section which provides an overview of the council's performance as a whole, including finances. And then this is followed by individual service areas with a narrative which is completed by the head of service. For this committee, it's from page 42 onwards are the service areas which you would scrutinize. Each section includes a narrative, which is completed by the relevant executive head of service, highlighting any challenges or any successes during that quarter. We then have the KPIs relevant to that service area and their performance for the current quarter that's being reported, as well as the previous 4 quarters. It then includes the service plan progress status, which shows the status of any actions planned for that service area. It then details complaints received for that service area in the reporting quarter and in the previous 4 quarters. And lastly, the finance tables. And each of those sections, if required, will include a comment by the executive head of service. So the report comes to this committee, and usually the relevant executive heads of service will be here to answer any questions that you have on the performance for that quarter. If they aren't present, I can take their questions away and we can come back to you with an answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And it probably goes without saying that we're worried about the reds. You know, if it's a green, there's no point in sort of celebrating it too long. We haven't got that long. We do have a speaker on this. Somebody has put his name down. It's Councillor Hyman, who is on Zoom. So Councillor Hyman, can you hear me? Would you like to speak to this item before we throw it open to the committee?
Well, yes, thank you very much indeed, Chairman. There's obviously quite a lot here that full of interesting information that we've been given. It's ripe for scrutiny and questioning, but I think probably not now for most of it, because the big issue to me on this is the issues with the planning service. We're looking at the separate updated document, pages 62 to 64. Members turn to 10 pages before the end of the document. We've got the KPIs, the key performance indicators for planning. We've got a very good explanation before that, a bit of text which I'm sure most members will have read. It's telling us there. Well, a week ago, this was sent to us, this document, and I had a quick look through it, printed out the page with the pretty coloured boxes on, and took it along to the. There was a training session which was on ethics, and I saw the leader there, and he said, and he'd been given some information that day, which wasn't the same as this, but it was over a longer period. And he said he would go away and try and find out how the two tied together, because they didn't seem to tie up to him. But I'm sure it does. It's just we're looking over different time periods probably. But I would very much like, and I hope other members would ask too, for a good explanation of the planning, the national indicators, how those relate to where we are at the moment being threatened with designation. Not that I think that the government would in any way want to take over Waverley's planning functions. I don't think they're that mad. We need to understand what this is telling us, because we're saying we've gone through there's a development management challenge toolkit, and I've been through the questions and looked at that, and I think we should also probably want to know exactly where we are with that improvement plan. How does the improvement plan and the work we've done and work on the challenge toolkit tie in with the improvements that have been made, so that we can keep track of what's working and what isn't working. So that's it. Two basic issues there. How do these tie in with the longer picture, the pictures we got there, and how are we progressing with the DM challenge toolkit, which is mentioned here as being an important part of our improvement plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Have we got somebody who's going to reply to that? Jenny first, is it?
Unfortunately, Claire Upton Brown, who's the executive head of service for that area, couldn't be here this evening, as mentioned earlier, but I can ask her to email an update and an explanation based on Councillor Hyman's question.
And Abby, can you answer the other questions? We'll wait for the DM from Claire, but Councillor Hyman also asked a question about how these figures relate and whether there's another set of figures that they're not being, I mean, can you just explain what, excuse me, Councillor Follows, you have no right to speak in this meeting. So could you just explain where these numbers come from and if they are correct and explain it to us? Thank you.
I think probably best if Claire provides an update note, as Jenny suggested, but it's about the time period against which the performance is monitored. So the national government looks at a longer period of time. So that means that even if you see a massive improvement in performance over kind of a 1-2 month, 2-year period or whatever it may be, they still look at an average over a greater longer period of time. So that's a kind of difference between what we're reporting here and what the national average is. So.
I think we're going to get the same answer if we've got queries about the performance from both Jenny and Abby. So I think what we have to do is put a question perhaps jointly back to planning just to get a full picture of what is actually happening to make sure that we are fully up to speed with housing, well, both I suppose completions and actually the commencements, just to make sure that everything is on track, so that what we're told about something being improved, you know, it does sort of relate to the figures. Looking at a row of red, it always raises questions. You know, we wouldn't be human if it didn't, would we? Right, does anybody else have anything they wish to ask about any of the areas that are covered by our committee? Whether we've got people here who can answer it, we'll have to wait and see. Yes, Ruth, Councillor Reid, sorry.
No mic, no mic.
Sorry about that. It'd be rather nice if we could be directed to the page, because we've got 2 documents. Thank you.
Yes, this was explained. It was a mistake. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. But of the document that was sent out, we were dealing with pages 42 onwards for our committee. So if you could sort of find those. So obviously planning starts it, and then we have community services, all of that, any of the other issues, lots of green, which is good news all the way through. But is there anything that is worrying you? 1 or 2 of these don't make sense, or are, because we've changed the way we do this, they're not relevant. Yes, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. The report that you found in your agenda pack was an error. It was a draft of the report, and that's why you should have received by email, I believe. And tonight, Kim would have given you a copy, a separate copy, which is the final report. So the copy that's in your agenda pack, which has some red writing in it, can be discarded and ignored because it's a draft.
Apologies. I mean, normally it would all be in the one document. This is just something that happened this particular time. But really and truly, what I want us to use this time for is to see what we're looking at and what we're scrutinizing, because obviously, if you turn to page 55 of that one, you can see we've got the KPIs for the bins, basically. And, you know, there's some issues here that you might want to raise with the head of service. So that's really what we're looking at. We're doing it. They've got 2 numbers, you know, you've got your number of the whole document, but the number of this document is page 55 or 73. 73 at the bottom, 55 a bit up. And they're all the same in the sense that they're different documents, but you're looking a bit confused. Have you all found a page 73, which is also 55?
That's the actual agenda.
Sorry, it's page 56 of the one that was sent out separately. And as I say, what the idea of this is that we have these quarters and we have the colours and we can see a trend. We're always a bit behind the times because obviously, you know, these are historic figures, but you can see a pattern and work out whether or not it's a good pattern or a bad pattern. And this is your chance at this committee to ask questions of the heads of service, if they are usually here, so that you can just clarify anything you wish to clarify. So you don't have to, you know, but that's what these figures are for. You read the writing, but you've got these nice boxes that give you a picture, a very clear graphic picture of where there's an issue. And if you look at E3A on that page 56, you know, you'll notice there's a slight problem with the number of refuse and recycling bins. But, you know, I take it there's something in hand, is there, Chris? Chris, has it not come under you?
Sorry, Chair, I missed that question.
Right, I'm just looking at your key performance indicators on waste and refuse recycling. I'm just using you as an example.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry about that. But we have a box in front of us, right? And there's two of the references that have red. And I just, you know, would say normally this would raise issues for us. Yep. And we would ask the head of service, should we be incredibly worried or is this on the mend? So can I ask you that, please?
Yes, so I would say, no, you don't need to be incredibly worried. So when we talk about miscollections on waste collection, we typically look for a very, very high success rate. So if you turn these figures on the head, we're talking about 40 per 100,000 as a target is a 99.96% accuracy rate. So it's an incredibly high accuracy rate we aim for. And that's normal in the industry. Somewhere around 0.04, 0.05 is where you would expect to be in these sorts of services. So it is a little bit higher, but it always looks very high compared to that, but it's actually only a tiny bit higher in percentage terms than where we are. But there is a factor that's affecting this at the moment, which is a bit unusual here. So we do have software in the cabs and on the ground with the guys who do the collections, but unfortunately there's been a few technical issues with that software for an extended period of time, and what that does is allows us to restrict stuff that shouldn't be coming through. So for example, it's completely open for all residents to report a miscollection when, for example, they forgot to put their bin out themselves. And so it will naturally be a bit higher than what we'd normally expect. So BIFA have been working very hard to try and sort out those technical issues with that, and we're expecting a solution to that soon, so we can bring those restrictions in. At that point, if we're still seeing those issues, I will have a different issue with BIFA, but at the moment, I think it's just being elevated by stuff that really isn't supposed to be there.
Thank you. You couldn't have done that better if we'd rehearsed it. You know, that's exactly the whole point of us raising questions to get the definitive answer. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like a little explanation on, I can see the colours, I can see the figures, but how is it actually measured? That's my point, please. Because I know that individuals can report on the website and talk to their borough council, but usually that, in my experience, that's resolved very quickly, but it isn't in the figures, probably.
No, all miscollections go through the contractor, and the contractor records miscollections it tends to. So that's what the figures are. So it would include those ones too.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions for Jenny or for any of the heads of service to do with? Oh, right. Sorry, Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question for Chris, Mr. Wheeler. It's on page 74, 13.22, E2. It says here that environmental cleanliness monitoring remains suspended and street cleaning is currently on a reactive service as opposed to scheduled cleaning basis, as the service continues to prioritise refuse and recycling collections. Perhaps Chris could just explain what the reason is for that. and what the impacts are?
So,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hess. So that is actually in relation to more rural parts rather than town centre parts, which are scheduled. So I'll make sure that's a bit clearer next time round. But it's about actually about how we use our resources and not using those resources to attend to streets that really don't need doing, and making sure we're a bit more reactive with those resources. So it's a little bit unclear in there, but I'll make sure it's a bit clearer next time round.
Councillor Rubini, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, page 62 or 44, don't mind which. It's the table of service-specific performance for the housing numbers, RP1 and RP2. Obviously, this is of some concern. The actual number of dwellings by all housing providers is all in red. I'm not quite sure what we can do about that, because obviously this is up to developers. But then it's also disappointing to see that the first figure on RP2 is also in red. And although it looks as though it is improving, I'd like some assurance, obviously under tilted balance, et cetera, that we can look at this and try and get it improved. Chairman, you're looking lost. Top of page 62 or 44?
We have somebody who can answer Councillor Rubini's question, or are we going to leave it to a written answer?
I can also issue a written answer. I guess, as you've touched on initially, Councillor, you know, we aren't able to control the rate of delivery from developers, despite issuing consent. So in many regards, we're at the behest of kind of seeing how quickly the market will deliver. I think previously there were other figures that were reported as well, and I think we have indicated that we'll report them on an annual basis, because the accuracy of those figures that were previously presented is kind of questionable. So I think if I can provide a kind of written update to you as to kind of what those additional figures may be, that'd be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 65 or page 47 in the corner, I'm looking at the leisure performance. It's talking about launching a Saturday night project successfully in Godalming Leisure Centre, offering 11 to 17-year-olds Saturday evenings. And this is a partnership between Waverley Borough Council and Places Leisure, which obviously has been taken now. But I'm interested to know if that's going to be rolled out across Waverley, because obviously every town has got young people that would really like to have that facility. Thank you.
Is that you, Tamsin? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and sorry, thank you, Councillor. Yes, to answer your question, it is already in place. So Cranley was the first one that was established pre-COVID and is running really successfully with circa 40 to 50 young people every Friday night. It's actually the Friday night project there. And we also have implemented one in Farnham as well. So that started about 12 months ago with similar sorts of numbers. So Godalming is the latest, which is why that's specifically suggested in here. And then once those are embedded and the new leisure management contract is in place, we will be looking at Hazelmere as well. So the intention is to absolutely have it borough-wide in each population centre through the leisure centres.
Yes, do come back. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm very interested, obviously, because I'm very involved with a local youth group of 11 to 14-year-olds, and they meet on a Friday evening. And it may be that something like this would be fantastic to divert their attention from being in a school hall. So thank you. Could you keep me updated on that, please? And when it's going to be rolled out, so that I can tell the youth leaders.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd quite like to sort of wrap this item up and get on to the local plan so that we can finish by 9. What I'm, yes, I'll take another question, don't worry. What I'm saying is you're going to get this one version in your papers, and it is important that you read it and you work out what is troubling you. You don't wait till you come in here and think, oh, there's a low, row of reds here, I'll ask a question. It has to be something that you put the work in before you come to the meeting, so that the questions we ask are relevant. Councillor Austin, you wish to ask something?
Thank you. I think there may be some crossover with Councillor Hyman's query. I'm looking on page 58 of the new agenda pack. It says here, we're just talking about the special measures letter. It says here that a response was set out to improvements that have been undertaken and those yet to take place, but set out in the updated improved action plan. I'm just wondering, do we have sight of that action plan? I'm just interested to know what advice has been received and what action has been taken by the planning department.
No, thank you, Councillor Austin. No, we all are, and that's where right at the beginning, do you want to turn? Thank you. We all are, because that's what we wanted to hear from Claire Upton Brown this evening. She is now going to send out, I hope she knows, a written response. I'm looking at Abby and Jenny because you promised the written response from Claire on this, but it is something that should come to this committee. There's no question we should be looking at it. So basically we'll wait for that written update, and then on September the 26th, when we have the next meeting, we shall have Claire here to be grilled on anything. Do warn her in advance that our dander will be up by then. So you know, we do have questions on that improvement plan, and it as I say, we haven't had any information, updated information, so that will come. So September the 26th. Can I move on now? Without everyone, yeah. So if we could move on then, and I think this time the corporate heads, yes, you may leave. Sorry about keeping you very long. And we'll get on to the item number 9, which is the local plan part 1 update. Just let the officers leave. Andrew Longley is going to present this on Zoom, and he's got a PowerPoint, which again will come to us. All being very quiet, but it's not quite like the chairs in the gallery, is it? All slamming when they leave. Right, if you ladies look as though you can move very quietly, so we'll move straight on. Andrew, welcome, and if you could introduce yourself and your update to local plan part 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Andrew Longley. I'm the interim planning policy manager. And I'm working with Matthew Ellis, his team, and he's in the room with you to help answer questions. And we're obviously part of Abby's department, as you saw in the earlier slides. I joined the council in 1987, which makes me feel incredibly old, but I left you in 2000, and I've been back here a year to assist with initially local plan part 2. But also kicking off this project. So if I may, I will share my screen and take you through some slides. I'm going to rattle through some slides which summarise the report, but they also hopefully give you a bit more context around the importance of the local plan and provide a bit of hot off the press advice that we've received from the Planning Advisory Service at a meeting yesterday. So I've summarised this in this presentation, which obviously isn't in your report, but we will put a summary in it for the report that goes forward to the executive. So if you could tell me if I'm sharing my screen successfully.
No, it's not showing, Andrew.
Let me have another go at that. Necessary, I'm going to right, I need to choose which screen to share. That would help.
That's it, it's showing now.
Yeah, okay. Success. Is the first slide's up? Okay. Fine, okay. But first of all, then, in terms of context, the local plan is an incredibly important document for the council. The quote there is from the NPPF. The government expects the planning system to be genuinely plan-led. You can read the rest of that. So it's a key statutory document for the council. Sorry, move my photos out of the way so you can see the screen. The importance that a lot of you will be aware of is that the local planning law is the starting point for determining planning applications. The wording is actually as set out there. Applications are to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless planning considerations indicate otherwise. And for anyone who's not familiar, the development plan isn't just the local plan, which on this diagram I've shown how Waverley has currently got its local plan in two parts, but it's also the neighbourhood plans and the waste and minerals plans produced by the county council. And those are produced within the context of national guidance and policy. I've referred to the key documents above. You'll hear a lot about the NPPF, which is the National Planning Policy Framework. And then beneath the local plan, we've got supplementary planning documents, and some of you may be familiar with the sustainability and climate change SPD that the council adopted last year. The production of the local plan and any other development plan has a very rigorous process to go through that's dictated by legislation and regulations, and there really is no shortcutting the requirements of those legal requirements. They get more prescriptive as we go through the process. So early on, the evidence gathering and early stage consultation, the council has a lot of flexibility about how it addresses that. But then once it's locked into the pre-submission publication stage onwards, it's very much driven by the examination process. The need to update the local plan, debated at great length by the council on the 21st of February this year, because there was a requirement, or there is a requirement in law that we review the plan at least once every 5 years to ensure that it remains up to date and effective. I'm not going to dwell on the way that was done because that was from a previous report and I've given the references to that, but just to make the point that housing is clearly a major issue and one of the main reasons that we need to update the plan. The chair will be very, very familiar with the appeal decision that I've quoted in the report, and just a bit of it at the bottom of this slide there, where we were criticised that we hadn't got an agreed timetable for updating the plan to address those housing supply issues. So that's what we're really trying to put in place quite quickly now, once the council's agreed on the scope and timetable. The resolution of the council in February was quite clear that it accepted the plan required updating, but it wanted us to look at options, including whether there was the opportunity to do running repairs on the existing plan, and a more comprehensive update of LPP1 and LPP2 together at a later stage. So we've done our best to explore those options, and I'm going to take you through those in a minute. The council did at that meeting also set aside funding to allow the process to begin. So we've got a budget in place to crack on. It's not an ideal time to be embarking on a plan making process because there's a lot of uncertainty around the government's planning reforms, which would, if implemented, change the system quite significantly. They envisage those being in place from late 2024 by the time regulations are put in place, but there's a good chance that those will be delayed. We haven't seen the revised NPPF that was promised for the spring, and clearly the possibility of a general election may disrupt the implementation of the other reforms. So we have to bear in mind that uncertainty. There's also a lot of uncertainty around the approach to local housing need, particularly whether the government will adopt new household projections in 2024, which could be beneficial for Waverley in that we may get a more realistic assessment of local housing need. Despite all that uncertainty, I think it's really important that the council pushes on. PAS, that's the acronym for Planning Advisory Service, they have advised that some councils have shelved their plan reviews, but they're very worried about that because it could be some time until we have certainty on those issues. And obviously the urgency of updating plans will be even more. And one of the key risks that we face if we don't push on is a continuation of speculative applications as the plan is, or parts of the plan are treated as out of date. So the broad options that we set out in the report that you've got are A, a comprehensive update of the local plan, and B, a partial alteration to the adopted LPP1, just trying to focus on housing issues. So I think it's table 1 in your report. I've just summarised that here, but the comprehensive update would need to go to around 2023 in terms of a plan period, because national guidance, national policy is that strategic policies need to have at least 15 years from adoption. It would be a single local plan drawing together strategic and non-strategic policies, and the aim would be to effectively have a new style plan, the sort of succinct visual document that the government is aiming for. And that may be enabled if we get national development management policies come through as promised, which would save having to repeat those in local plans. The partial alteration, on the other hand, I think would only work if we could limit it to the existing plan period, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So the scope would be very much limited to strategic policies, focusing on housing supply, keeping much of the plan structure the same and leaving policies untouched. And there are some standard, there are some elements that would be consistent across both options, which I've listed there, but I won't dwell on. The programme, as I've said, we have to go through the legislative process, which dictates some of those timescales. The initial focus of all the options will be on evidence gathering and early consultation. For option A, apologies if it's confusing, but we've shown 2 timescales depending on whether the planning reforms come in or not, because the planning reforms will have a statutory 30-month timescale for producing a plan. So we've shown that as track 2, but track 1 is the timescale that we think is achievable if we work to the current system. And then option B at the bottom, there are some transitional deadlines that the government's proposing that you could progress a plan under the existing system, but you would have to submit it by the 30th of June 2025. All of these programmes, I think it goes without saying, are much faster than it's been possible to produce plans in the borough before. The LPP2 took 4 years to get to submission. We're suggesting 3 years, and obviously it's a more complex plan. LPP1 took a lot longer, but you'll be familiar, well, some of you will be familiar with the reasons behind that. So we've set out pros and cons in the report. The comprehensive updates, as you can see there, we can get cracking with it with the existing system, building flexibility to migrate to a new system if it comes in, and it will give you at the end of the day a new style local plan. But in terms of the cons, we're very reliant on the transitional arrangements, and the processes we'll have to use are more complex in terms of the assessment regime and the evidence requirements than the planning reforms proposed. And the final point is that because we'd be trying to cover off strategic and non-strategic policies, it could potentially take longer unless we're successful in being able to save the up-to-date policies in LPP2 and rely on supplementary plans and the neighbourhood plans to continue to deal with most non-strategic site allocations. The partial alteration, on the other hand, potentially quicker to adopt, which would obviously play well with appeals. Could be done in parallel with a comprehensive update, beg your pardon, all we're done. But a high risk of failing the examination if we only plan to 2032, because it conflicts with the MPPF. Very difficult to limit housing supply, limit it to housing supply matters because of the links with jobs, with infrastructure, with the environment. And also, if we ended up having to do 2 plans in parallel, it would be confusing and costly, confusing to stakeholders and costly to the council. So in the report you've got, we are recommending option A as the best use of resources, but also making the point that whilst a new plan will get back control of the housing requirements, it won't be a quick solution to the 5-year supply. So the council will need to look at other mechanisms, and it's been agreed that we should update the housing delivery action plan to look at what measures might bring forward sites. The bit of additional information that I mentioned is that we've sought input from the Planning Advisory Service, who are an independent source of expertise around planning matters. They've brought in their local plan consultants who produce the local plan toolkit that we're using. They're called DAC Planning, and we had a very constructive meeting with them yesterday, and they were quite frank that they felt that option A, the comprehensive approach, is really the only feasible approach. They felt that the timescales we had were ambitious but realistic. Option B, they just saw it as an uphill struggle to persuade an inspector. But more importantly, I think they didn't feel it would save a great deal of time because of the statutory stages we have to go through, and also the fact that of all the issues we could pick to do a focused plan, housing is likely to be the most contentious and difficult to progress. They have recommended some refinements to the programme, and we'll be working with them to make sure that we've got the most robust programme we can come up with. So sorry if this is running on a bit, but the next steps set out in the report, we're working on a more detailed work programme, as I say, with PAS and its consultants. That will allow us to update the local development scheme, which is the council's work programme in terms of planning documents that it's producing, and that will be very helpful in addressing concerns that inspectors have that we don't have a plan, a strategy as to how we move forward. Communications is going to be incredibly important, and we're very aware that the town and parish councils will be wanting to update their neighbourhood plans as soon as possible, and we need to work with them to identify the best time for those bits of work to commence. We're looking at the evidence base that we've got, and PAS, I think we're quite helpful in reminding us that actually the council has got quite a lot of up-to-date evidence. That it's got one bang up-to-date plan and one plan that's only just reached 5 years old. So a lot of the work in there will give us a good starting point for pushing forward with the plan and trying to minimise the amount of work that we actually have to commission, which will reduce time and costs. There are some other pieces of work that we mentioned in the report and are listed there. And as set out in the budget section, we did commit that we would review those budget requirements in the light of a detailed work programme to make sure that we've got the right staff resource and budget in place, but that we're not setting aside funds that aren't required. So, Chair, these are the recommendations that are in your report, and I think tonight is an opportunity to quiz Matthew and myself, and to add anything that you would like going on to the executive in terms of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And for those of you who don't know Matthew Ellis, he is also planning policy, and he's sitting here, and he will also answer questions. So over to you. Apologise, I did read it. We have Councillor Hyman who wishes to speak on this item, so we'll take him first and then I'll throw it open to the committee. Councillor Hyman, are you still there?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Thank you very much indeed. You can hear me. This is well. Thank you to Andrew for that quite comprehensive explanation there. It's very useful for members, I'm sure. A concern here, obviously, is over timescales. I get a flashback now to our February council meeting, where which was extended to include LPP1 and review, and where the chairman and myself were arguing that this wasn't the way to go, and we are where we are, and we're now finding that the quick minimum update that the council wanted and everybody voted for never really existed, and there is a great danger of overcomplicating matters here and this going on forever. We see in our papers that it says 7 years is the average time for putting together getting a plan through. We're trying to do it fast, but we know that in reality things are going to take longer. I am worried. We're also being told that we should put in a longer plan to 2045 or whatever. Well, the longer the plan, I mean, we're looking into a future that we just can't see from where we're standing. The longer the plan, the more housing's needed to identify that we've got to identify now. And all that does is bring upon us more development. We need to apply the constraints first. Obviously, that was the decision that was made by the council, who were in listening mode a part of the time, and our decision at February Council was subject to putting in place to looking at the constraints, and they have to be looked at first of all. There's very little point in spending a lot of time working out the highest numbers that we can possibly take. If our constraints say we can't take anything like that, why on earth would we want to spend possibly years finding sites that we're not going to need to find if we apply the constraints properly? So really, this is the timescales that we're being told. I think we need to do something sooner. We've got the 5-year housing land supply problem, which this doesn't fix for us, as we've been told. So what we need to know is how much development can be mitigated in terms of in compliance with the habitats legislation, people over wind. And this goes back to what you said, Chairman, at the beginning of this meeting, where we have got problems with the amount of mitigation that we can provide, and of course the law requires that we look at how effective it is, so we know how many houses we can be justified, rather than, as has been done in the past, simply assuming that mitigation is fully effective and that we can pretty much mitigate anything regardless without the evidence. This has got to be evidence based. We've got a meeting of the Joint Strategic Partnership Board in 2 weeks' time, beginning of July. Hopefully we'll be able to get our member there. A representative is going to be from the other side of the borough. Will be the portfolio holder for the environment, and we need her to ask when are Natural England going to be able to give us the evidence, because that determines the timescale. If they're going to spend another 15 years providing evidence, we shouldn't even be embarking on this journey. We should just be applying the constraints now. So, Chairman, to wrap up, I think that the idea here really is, I think that you should put in place 2 working groups. I think you probably agree. One to look at the challenge toolkit, the areas of planning improvement that we need to do, and the other to look at this LPP1 and get things moving, because waiting months and months for things to start happening simply isn't going to keep our residents happy, and it will be letting them down. We need to see the improvement plan in one working group. We need to see the LPP1 and really guide the executive on this, because you and I have been right for a long time. We need to help the executive sort this out without ending into kicking things into the long grass as they have done before.
Councillor Hyman. Well, I agree with 99% of what you
said. Yeah, indeed, yes. Look at the constraints first, and can we go to examination without Natural England's evidence first? That's what I'm saying. Thanks, Chairman.
I couldn't agree more, Councillor Hyman. Whether Matthew wants to respond to that, there wasn't really a question there, it was more a statement, but you're very welcome to reply if you wish.
I'll try to come in and answer, and if Andrew may come in if he needs to fill in a bit more. But with regard to the constraints, yes, that's something we will be doing, because as Andrew suggested, option A looks at gathering evidence immediately if this is agreed that the approach should be taken. And that will include looking at constraints, although obviously we need to take the advice in the National Planning Policy Framework with regard to what the starting point is. Councillor Hyman's question with regard to the habitats regulations, yes, of course, that is a legal requirement. It's something we will need to carry out, and we will look to be commissioning that early in the process. But obviously it is also an iterative process where you need to look at also what's being planned for to assess that against. But yes, we will need to establish what those constraints are with regard to the habitats in order for us to prepare the plan.
If I could just come back just to follow up with the question and the answer. I think one of our frustrations has been that we always seem to get the number and then spend years trying to work out how we could possibly accommodate it, when it is perfectly possible for us to do a locally calculated housing need assessment. And some boroughs we know have done this, boroughs and districts. So I think what Councillor Hyman and I were saying was look at the constraints and come up with a number that we can defend, but which does take into account that we are a borough with constraints. So I think it's the order of how you approach it, whether you go for a number first and then work out where to put it, or whether you work out where you can actually put housing and then come up with a locally assessed, well, try and argue for a number that may not be the same as the standard method.
Chairman, if I could, if I could add to that, it's not a case of doing constraints first and then looking at needs. We need to progress gathering evidence in relation to both of those areas, because the NPPF is quite clear that the starting point should be the local housing needs assessment calculated using the standard method. But as we've set out in the report, we're not intending just to do that. We will be commissioning further work looking at the projections to make the best case we can as to why the number that we finally end up with is the right number. And that will obviously be informed by the constraints, particularly if the reforms announced by Michael Gove in his December last year written ministerial statement, if we see those carried through in force, that will really strengthen the council's hand in identifying what the constraints are. But it's not a case of let's work out how much constraints we've got. It's a case of balancing what the housing need is with what we can realistically accommodate within the borough, given those constraints, of which the SPA is clearly a very significant constraint that we need to look at. And obviously working with Natural England is a key part of this early work.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to? Councillor Hess.
Complicated old subject, isn't it? The effect on housing numbers by the new standard method for calculating seems to be potentially pushing up the requirement, and then rolled into all of this is the duty to cooperate with other local authorities. And I seem to recall from the previous agenda earlier in the year, there were something like 11 other local authorities that Waverley Borough Council had to write out to see if they had any unmet housing need. Now, I don't know how that affects our housing numbers, because we all know that we took on 50% of Woking's unmet housing need some time ago. And it strikes me that we could be looking at the possibility of having to do the same thing again, but from how many local authorities, how much unmet housing need, how will that translate into how many houses will have to be built across the borough? It strikes me that the process is full of, and through no fault of Andrew Longley's or Waverley's, it's a system that's been set up by central government. It just strikes me it's like a hall of mirrors, or smoke and mirrors, however you want to look at it, to actually get a hold of what the effect will be ultimately with a new LPP 1/2, in terms of what we'll be expected to build and how that will affect our communities, because it all really then filters down into finding sites which can be built on to fulfill those numbers. And I think the unmet housing need aspect from all these different local authorities is a big, it's a big question mark, you know, and perhaps Andrew could just touch on that for us. Thanks.
Okay, Andrew, when you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hess. I mean, you've summarised the difficulties quite succinctly there in terms of the different strands. At paragraph 7.16 and 7.17 of your report, well, in fact 7.18, I've tried to explain those issues in a little more detail in terms of the starting point that we have to have with the standard method and the local housing need. I did mention that the household projections, if they are released next year, and if the government does accept that they are a more appropriate basis for the standard method, I think that could see Waverley's numbers come down using the standard method. At paragraph 7.17, I do make the point that the NPPF still says that we need to consider unmet needs from adjoining authorities, but obviously the duty to cooperate is the only mechanism for those discussions at the moment, and that's proposed to be ditched by the planning reforms. So I may have sort of gone a little bit further at 7.17, but I've made the point at the end that given the difficulties that we have meeting our current housing requirements, it's difficult to conceive that there's going to be scope to accommodate needs from outside. Now, it's something the council is required to consider in due course, but I think I've taken the soundings from members when we discussed this before, and I think it would be quite a reasonable position because Waverley of the Surrey authorities involved in the housing market area before, Waverley is the one that struggles with its 5-year supply and therefore speculative applications. So yes, we are, Councillor, we are very alive to those issues, and we'll be making the best case for accommodating as much of the local housing need as we can, but not relying on the standard method as the only way of assessing that.
No other hands at the moment. Can I ask a couple? Oh, sorry, Councillor Austin. Do put your hand up before I start speaking, and then I won't feel I'm getting in your way.
Thanks, Chairman. My question is about affordable housing. You know, under the PP1 and other rules, both nationally and locally, we put down a number of percentage that a number of affordable houses should be built when the site reaches a certain specification. However, what I'm finding is, first of all, we don't always get to that figure anyway in the planning application. And secondly, when we do, we are now finding, particularly in the town centres, that the developers are coming back with some viability studies that show in effect they can't actually build those anyway. And that although we give them permission for it, for planning, and that includes the affordable, we are ending up with none. And yet that's against our PP1 or whatever. Is there anything that we can do to actually regularise that? But it seems silly to write it into our regulations if in fact it's either not enforceable or in fact it can't be done by developers. And that to me seems totally wrong.
Yeah, this comes up time after time. Can anyone reassure Councillor Rubini, or do we just have to take it on the chin?
I can make a general, sorry, Matthew, I can't see you, so I don't know if I'm jumping in, but obviously we have to do a plan-wide viability assessment when we produce policies, and that assessed that the requirements for affordable housing were viable. But when you come down to individual sites and infrastructure requirements, that's when renegotiation often rears its head. But in a very strong housing market such as Waverley's, I think Matthew will correct me, but I think the figure is 30%, and most housing sites should be able to provide that. But sorry, Matthew, did you want to?
No, I wasn't going to say much different than that. It is clearly set out in policy, but on individual sites, they will need to assess the viability of that particular scheme. And as Andrew said, we undertook viability testing for the policies when we set out, and we prepared local plan part 1, and obviously that was examined and it was felt to be the right approach to take. But it is always going to be the case that a planning application will be also determined on its merits, so that sort of information will be important in the consideration.
I think Councillor Rubini and I and everybody else on the committees are so frustrated because they don't say at the outset with the planning application that they will not build the affordable. We give permission with the affordable, and then they come in with a viability assessment saying, oh, now we're on site, we can't actually build them. And that's, I think, where we all get so frustrated. Oops.
Yes, if I could come back, Chair, you're absolutely right. And my problem is that, of course, we're writing this in PP1 and we can't enforce it, but we're just losing it, particularly as I say in the town centres, where we're building housing there and we're not having affordable housing, i.e. the young people, presumably, that they're not able, I don't like the term affordable anyway, but we are where we are. And I'm just getting totally frustrated that even though we put it in PP1, it doesn't actually mean anything with the viability study after we've given permission.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. Please excuse, I'm obviously new to this, but I understood that at the February meeting, you wanted to find a credible strategy for updating the LPP one, which was going to take, I understood, maybe a year and a half. And now we're talking about actually a whole new local plan. Was that actually on the table in February? Well, I don't know, because was that explained to councillors that was on the table in February? My second question relates to neighbourhood plans. 2026, 2027, that sounds like very bad news for our neighbourhood plans. What's the impact? Thanks.
The answer to your first question was no, because we asked them directly, are you determined to do a full revision? And we were told, no, not necessarily. So, the options were always held open. But Abby, do you wish to add?
Thank you, Councillor. If I may, I think paragraph 1.1 captures the resolution from that February committee, and it outlines that officers would explore all options relating to including updating the plan immediately to make it broadly compliant with the latest NPPF, and obviously that we'll bring something back through. And I think the report that Andrew and colleagues have produced actually talks through quite well the pros, cons, and we saw advice from PAS as well separately, kind of playing back through the various options. So I think the resolution, or certainly my understanding, is that we were to explore all options, and I think that's what we've done and what we've presented in this report.
And can somebody explain to our neighbourhood planning groups that by changing it to 2043, every single neighbourhood plan has to go back to the drawing board?
Well, Chair, I mean, plan making is a continuous process of updating, and it would be for the neighbourhood planning groups to decide the point at which they want to embark on the updating of their plans. But trying to keep to an existing end date for a plan is no protection from having to look forward and to plan for those wider needs as the NPPF requires us to do. So we will work very closely with the town and parish councils so that they can understand the process that we need to embark upon and make the decisions, which are decisions for them, as to at what point do they wish to update their plans. And part of that is obviously the debate you had last time about which plans need to be allocated non-strategic sites, and some of the neighbourhood planning groups decided that was for the Part 2 local plan. Others, such as Farnham, you've done that for yourselves, and you know the work that goes into that. But that's the sort of nature of the debate I can foresee going forward.
I mean, if I were a small parish, I wouldn't even do another one, because everything was based on the fact that we had a 15-year plan in Waverley. I mean, that was the whole point. We had a 15-year plan. Local plan part 1 is only 5 years old, and local plan part 2 is a baby. You know, it's hardly out of its nappies. So, you know, we have, or should have, an up-to-date local plan that should, in theory, be working for the borough. And the decision we've taken is to completely revise local plan part 1 and then sort of number it, if you like, to give it another 15 years from whenever, you know, it gets sort of through. So, you know, going up to 43, as Councillor Hyman said, I mean, it's a figure that is so far in the future. And there's no question. I mean, there's no neighbourhood planning team with the resources to keep up with that. Absolutely none. I mean, even the you know, the wealthiest ones. So, I mean, basically, there will be no neighbourhood planning of any import in the borough, as far as I can see, under that. I've got a couple of sort of things that I'd like to test with the committee to see whether you agree. I think the recommendations are a little bit bald, and I would certainly like something. I know Andrew mentioned communicating with neighbourhood plans, but I do think we should put something in the recommendations that actually say something like housing figures and the spatial strategy must be shared at the earliest time with all neighbourhood planning groups, because, you know, if they are going to be in deep doo-doo, they need to be told. So I would like to add something like that, I don't know the wording, I haven't written it down particularly well. I would also like to put in, coming up from other points that people have made, that serious consideration at the earliest opportunity is given to the possibility of defending a locally calculated housing number. I mean, I really do think that we cannot be bounced into, you know, a number that we feel we cannot deliver. And we argued all the time in local plan part 2 that the reason it was so slow was because we couldn't find the sites to allocate. Well, you know, how can we then suddenly find sites for hundreds of others? You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. So I'd like to flag up the possibility of a locally calculated housing need, unless any of the officers tell me that that's, I know other boroughs do it. I mean, it's not something I've just made up.
No, Chair, if I can respond to that, at 7.16 is where we talk about that. National guidance is clear that the standard method is still the government's approach. And despite Michael Gove's comments in December, we haven't seen a proposal to replace that. So they're sticking with it, and they're looking at sort of tightening up on the exceptional circumstances where a different approach might be warranted. But despite all that, we are saying at the end of that paragraph that it's recommended that the council commissions that evidence as a sense test for what's coming out of the standard method, because I think it will be part of deciding what the right number for Waverley is and being able to defend that, because it links back to the discussion you've just had around affordable housing, which is clearly going to be a major issue for the new plan going forward. And the standard method is premised on the idea that by upping Waverley's numbers by 90%, housing becomes more affordable. Well, I can't see that playing out in the housing market as it stands. It might be a sort of economic argument with merit, but I think Waverley's approach is going to have to be more focused on getting the right number and then getting the affordable housing within that number, as you've said.
That was the point I was making, Andrew, that, you know, I think our recommendations to committee should be broader than what we've said, which is, yes, go away and come up with a timetable. You know, I think we should be saying these things that, you know, as I say, serious consideration should be given to the possibility of defending a locally calculated need. The other thing I think we should be saying, and this is something that came out of the debate in February, we very much dismissed our current local plan. We sort of said it was total rubbish and therefore we should do something with it. And this does not play well in the public. I mean, we must defend what we've got at the moment, which is well, no, it's not up to date because of the housing numbers, but, you know, we have a local plan part 1 and a local plan part 2, which is a complete local plan And although it's out of date because of the housing numbers, we should defend it at every possible opportunity. If we dismiss it and say, well, you know, we had to do this because really and truly that it's absolutely pointless, then we get it thrown back at us at appeals. And those of us who go to appeals don't like to hear that. Councillor Reid.
I know there are restraints, excuse me, but in number 7.1717, we are going to have to face all sorts of constraints and challenges. And as we have Matthew here now, Matthew Ellis, he does an awful lot of work for the AONB, and he would know about other designations in the green belt. I wonder how important and how long this is going to take, this work that you're doing on the constraints that we will have, because a lot of the work, for example, on the AONB, as Andrew knows, is ongoing and probably won't be decided how much of the green belt, how little of the green belt is going to be encompassed in the area that we're talking about in Waverley in the future. That might not be for another 2 years, for instance. That's one of the points I'd like to make. So if Andrew could comment on that, that would be good. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, you're right. In terms of the AONB, obviously, the review's been undertaken now. They've just finished the consultation, the first consultation, and are obviously considering the representations that are being made on that. We will need to take into account where we are or how emerging those proposals are with regard to the AONB. I mean, the AONB in itself doesn't say there should be no development within it, but obviously it is of the highest protection that should be afforded to it. So we will need to take that into account, even if they are candidate areas or areas that are being put forward for that. So it will be in the context, but yes, the evidence gathering we're looking to, because of the timetable, to obviously achieve that in the first year or look at it in the first year for us to start preparing the consultations with regard to the plan.
I mean, much of the work will have been done. It's a question of whether there's been any updates. I mean, you know, the AONB has been there and there's going to be updates. The Greenbelt's been there, there may be updates. But, you know, I think the point that was made earlier was that the constraints must be taken alongside the numbers so that we're not trying to squeeze the numbers into the constraints or use the constraints to bring the numbers down. They have to go together. Councillor Reid.
I'd like to come back because this is not finished. It's ongoing and it may be taking another 2 years because it's got to go to government for government approval, as you know. The other point I was going to make is the fact that we've got these challenges here, and we all know that development plans are always being developed. They're not in stone, and we do update them and we do review them. So I think we have to be somewhat flexible. And at 7.17, I also think that it does say there, and I agree that because of all these restrictions, we cannot be taking development from other nearby authorities. You know, there are arguments that I wish and I hope that officers will put forward and support us with so that we can look at the needs within our own borough first. Thank you.
I think most of us would say amen to that. Can we look at the recommendations and see, oh, sorry, Councillor, I'll take you in a moment. Can I just say, can we now get focused on the recommendations? But obviously I'll take you, Councillor King.
I just wanted, Chairman, I just wanted to go back to the point that Councillor Rubini was making about the affordable housing, and Mr. Longley was saying, you know, that we need affordable housing, but you know, time and time again we've had these big applications come in, and we're hopeful that we'll get affordable housing, which is good. Unless we stop the developers from coming back with these viability studies, we are not going to get anything out of these developments. And it's so sad, but they know They give it a few months, they come back and they say, sorry, you know, we can't give you any affordable housing. And we're stuck.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why I'd like to put in a couple more recommendations and the bold recommendations that are there. You know, they're more, if you like, informatives, but I think what you have just said, we should be sending a message to the executive on this approach that we need robust policies on affordable homes and policies that, you know, will stand up to the, choose a word that's suitable. Shenanigans is hardly a planning word, is it? But, you know, I mean, basically, we should, you know, have our robust policies towards affordable homes. We should make it a priority is really what I'm trying to say. And I still think we should underline when we're doing this, the importance of our development plan and the fact that we are going to update the timetable, but the, you know, the importance of the current development plan, because otherwise when we go to appeal, why would anybody else respect it? So, you know, we are in a difficult situation with the 5-year housing land supply. We have got the tilted balance. We don't have any policies in this borough that carry full weight necessarily. So we are in danger, but I mean, at least if we can talk up our development plan as it stands, then we should be able to defend it better. I think we should definitely put something on about defending a lower figure or a locally assessed need, and we can incorporate due to the constraints of the borough, and these two things should be looked at very closely at the same time. I think there is a feeling very much that you know, we cannot deliver the standard method, and if there is a chance that we can go for a locally assessed need, as Andrew says, we might find next year that the projections are down. The house, you know, the birth numbers, well, not so much the birth numbers, well, yeah, the birth numbers are down, but it is also the population is not rising in the way that they thought it would. It's 3.5 or whatever. In fact, in Scotland, I think it's 0.3. They've got a really, you know, poor projection in terms of population. And I would like definitely to put in something about housing figures and spatial strategies shared with all NP groups, neighbourhood plan groups, as quickly as possible. You know, we can't wait till 2040, whatever whenever we deliver this, to say to the NP groups, oh, by the way, you've all got to tear up your plan and start again. But this has to be working together, because we've worked together on the initial ones. You know, we worked with local plan part 1 to get the first neighbourhood plans through they could comply with basic conditions. So basically, we do need to know you know, what position we're putting local plans in, neighbourhood plans in, and we need to be able to give them the support. Personally, I'd like to write to the DLUHC and see, you know, what the heck we are actually allowed to do, because I'm still not sure that we're getting definitive advice. Not being rude to PAS, I'm not being rude to anybody, because it is so complicated. Everything is in transition. But, you know, I'm not sure that I think we're just being far too cautious, to be perfectly honest. And I think we're, you know, to the detriment of the borough. But anyway, I was outvoted on that. Does anybody disagree with adding something? You're quite happy with those points being added? Councillor Hess?
Excuse me, Chair. I support what you were just saying. If we can use locally calculated housing need, because it strikes me that with the uncertainty about the forthcoming white paper, when's it coming, what's it going to contain, this whole exercise could swallow up a lot of money in drawing up all the documentation and data, only to find that central government have moved the goalposts and rendered some of it redundant. So if at least we could have the housing numbers for the borough based on locally calculated housing need, that might be a step in the right direction.
I agree with you. And I'm quite serious about writing to the DLUHC. I don't know how often you write to DLUC. I seem to write weekly, getting me absolutely nowhere. But, you know, I think we should get some clarity on this. You know, spring has sprung, we're into midsummer, and we still haven't got any updates to the MPPF. We know the levelling up bill is supposed to come later, but there's not even a single update. And I think LPA should have that power to get answers out of DLUC. I mean, I don't really see why they shouldn't. And I think we should, before we, you know, really get bogged down in this. I'm very worried about this, I have to say. I was worried about it in February, as you know, and I remain absolutely worried about it. I think it's far too damaging to the borough. But it goes obviously hand in hand with the development management update, so that we can at least get the 5-year housing land supply in place. Well, we hope we can. At least that will give us some strength, or at least if the changes to the MPPF come in, then we may get some advantages. Andrew, do you wish to sum up?
Yeah, Chairman, that's been really helpful discussion. And on the DLUC point, I'm sure we can take that up. I'm actually attending a conference tomorrow where there's a DLUC speaker, so I'll see, and it's specifically around the planning reform, so I'll see if there's any new information to share following that. The 4 points that I think you would wish to add was around the housing figures and the space. Well, the first one I've got is the housing figures and the spatial strategy need sharing at the earliest possible point with the neighbourhood planning groups. Second one was consideration should be given to calculating a local housing needs figure, which, as I say, we have covered in the report, but that's clearly something the committee feels strongly about. We must make sure that we're defending the existing plan, and that's certainly the intention, and we can make sure we reiterate that. And obviously legal advice has been that the best way to get inspectors to give support to the plan is to show that you are keeping on top of things and updating policies where they need to be updated. And then the fourth one was the importance of robust policies around affordable housing that will stand up to viability arguments at the application stage. I'm not sure if I've missed anything, but those are 4 really good points that we can take for. Oh, and plus the DLUC clarity point.
Lovely. Anybody wish to sum up or add anything, Councillor Hess?
Just to query, thank you, Chair. Just to query what Andrew just said. He said at the planning stage, and I think what, if I'm not mistaken, Councillor Rubini was referring to was after the planning stage on approved schemes where the developers come back in with spurious reasons to take out the affordable housing with a financial appraisal. Perhaps Councillor Rubini can confirm if I'm right there.
I think the problem is that we're dealing with policy here. So we've got to write a robust policy which will be strong enough so that that doesn't happen. You know, I mean, it's a DM issue, not a policy issue, isn't it? It's a development management issue. But here we need to get the wording so robust in the policy that it's harder for them to come in with this financial viability. How we do that, I don't know. I mean, if I knew, I'd tell you. But I think that's the difference, you know, what happens at DM. And I do think we need to get, sometimes I do wonder about you all being quite so far apart, DM and policy. And there was a time when policy was right hidden up in the rafters here. You never saw them. You know, you knew they existed because you saw their names occasionally, and then they'd rush out at dawn or whatever, you know, but they were absolutely hidden. It's true, isn't it? You were hidden up there for years. And then suddenly they were exposed and had to come down and sit near the planning, the DM team. And I do think the two have to work together because, you know, this is a prime issue that if we get a robust policy, then we can, you know, use it in the DM process to get robust planning decisions. But yes, Councillor Rubini.
Yes, I mean, Councillor Hess is absolutely right. That's what I was talking about. We can get the original planning application with affordable. That's not the problem. The problem is that either they sell it on, or for some reason themselves, they decide they can no longer afford to put those affordable products. Now I accept that it's very difficult to do a policy that is future-proof, But we've got to look at something, please, if you could expand somewhere, just to try and make sure that these viability studies, when they do come in, because the frustration I have is that every time one's come in our planning committee, then unfortunately we do one to assess their viability study and they agree. Our people say, yeah, he's absolutely right, you can't afford to do it. There's something wrong somewhere.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Councillor Rubini, but it is wording in the policy that we've got to concentrate on here and then make sure that we apply it robustly at the next stage. Does anyone from the planning, Abby, are you looking as though you wanted to?
No, I was just going to say, I think you've captured it essentially, but you know, we need to be mindful of kind of how national policy sits on that point around viability, and also then how that's translated into local policy, and that's certainly something that's coming across very loud and clear as something that we need to pick up. Just in terms of the kind of 4 elements of kind of the recommendations, I think once we've had the minutes from Kim, we'll obviously include them within the report that goes on to executive, which is penned in the diary for the 5th, for the 4th, gosh, 4th of July.
Auspicious day. Just going back to affordability and the idea that you can build enough houses to be affordable. Kate Barker, in I think it was 2006, Andrew can probably correct me, did a really superb report, and she said you cannot build your way into affordability. If you did, you would have places that would be so totally, nobody would want to live in them. They wouldn't, you can't do it. It just is not possible. We have to do what we can as a local authority. Good old Prince William is doing what I've always said has got to happen. But, either local planning authorities or the government, somebody has to donate the land, because that's the only way we're going to get vast numbers. It happened after the war, and it's got to happen again, because quite frankly, we're never going to do it just on our housing developments. Does anybody else wish to add anything, or can we thank the officers and sum up? Is that everyone feel they've had a fair say? And obviously there's more that you can say as we go through the process, but yes, I think it's going to be interesting, should we put it that way? We live in interesting times, as Councillor Victor Duckett always used to say. So I think with that, that's probably the end of the meeting. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to Matthew and Abby for being in the chamber the whole time. And yeah, next time we'll be in the committee room round a table, look at the forward programme, including the fact that Claire Upton Brown will be giving us an update on the development management, and let me know if there's anything else. We don't want to crowd the debates because they take the long time. Presentations are briefer, but anything you want to bring up, just zap an email to myself and the Vice Chair, and we'll see what we can incorporate. Thank you very much indeed.